Okay, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show on a weird Monday, of course, Black Monday. I'm joined by Sumer Sports CEO, former Falcons GM Thomas Dimitroff. I'm Eric Eager. I'm one of the VPs at Sumer Sports. Thomas, it is a weird Monday. Honestly, it hasn't been. There haven't actually been as many moves as I thought there would be. So in that way, it's been better than I expected. But what goes through your mind on a day like today, where you see a lot of your friends and a lot of moves throughout the league happen? Throughout the league.
I think you just become really particular about who you're reaching out to communicate with. Some people are on the verge of it. Some people are in the middle of it. Some people, are free of it. And it's just you have to always check yourself thinking, okay, did they miss the playoffs? Are they firing someone within the organization? Is their coach still there? I mean, look, there's a lot stirring around, and we're all very mindful of it as former and current head coaches and general managers. And yet the reality is that's what we signed up for, right? So no one realizes, what does Rich McKay say? It never ends well.
Never ends well.
And there's Rich McKay in the middle of it again with the Falcons, and it's not ending well. It didn't end well, of course, but that happens. And I'll be interested in talking about some of the organizations today and where we're going with it.
Yeah, I mean, should we start there in our own hometown here of Atlanta, Georgia, with the Falcons? Arthur Smith, he was let go at 12:02 a.m. this morning. It was, kind of an unceremonious, tenure for him. They went 7-10 3 straight seasons, right? It was sort of, it was really interesting for him, right? Because they've had 3 straight top 10 picks, all of them in, the skill positions, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. They carried over from your regime, of course, and I know this is awkward for you a little bit. They carried over from your regime an offensive line that is pretty good, right? And they brought over, using some of the cap dollars that they've been able to accumulate, the Jesse Bateses of the world, the Calais Campbells of the world. They have had, they did have a top-end defense this year. A lot of that, though, is because, and somebody tweeted this out, however you measure it, we at Sumer Sports measure it with our ELO rating. Some people measure it differently, but they had, the easiest schedule in the NFL this year. But they did have a top-end defense, and they were just unable to get it going, Thomas. And so, they let him go. One of the reasons that Arthur Smith was hired in Atlanta was he took over an offense in Tennessee that was mired in sort of ineptitude and mediocrity, and he got that thing moving, right? Ryan Tannehill, who had been a bust in Miami, led the NFL in yards per pass attempt in 2019. He was a Pro Bowler that year. They went to the conference championship in Kansas City, where they stalled out there. The following year, they won the division, the AFC South, in 2020. So he was a hot commodity when he went to Atlanta. He goes there, they have the 1 year with Matt Ryan. Matt plays pretty well for a part of that season. They flirt with the Deshaun Watson thing in 2022. That doesn't work out. Kind of makes Matt Ryan unhappy. So they go back to the guy that he benched in Tennessee, Marcus Mariota. Of course, that doesn't work out. So then this year they go into the year, and I think that this was ultimately what kind of ended his tenure as the Falcons head coach. They went into this season with Desmond Ridder, a 3rd-round pick out of the University of Cincinnati, a 5-year player at UC, backed up by a career backup in Taylor Heineke. That's who they chose to be their quarterback and to sort of guide that offense with 3 top 10 picks as the car. And it just didn't work, right? And I think a lot of people saw that coming. They didn't, and that's ultimately why this thing didn't work out, Thomas.
Yeah, let's start by saying what you just said. I mean, Arthur Smith is a very smart man. He knows football. Just like we've said about GMs, though, there's certain GMs out there, probably some of the best evaluators, or really go toe-to-toe with anyone as far as the nuances of evaluating. But in that position, it comes down to the big choices that you make: coaches, quarterbacks, first-round picks, big-time trades, right? And it's the same on the coaching side. You can be really smart. You can be a scheme guy. You can be a developmental. guy. But if you don't make the right decisions at the right time and you don't, call it the way it is in this situation, hook yourself to the right horse or the right leader, i.e. the quarterback, then that's what you're attached to. And that's unfortunate. I mean, look, we all saw it. I mean, Arthur Smith 100% was outspoken that was the guy he was going with. And he probably did that, rightly so, that he had to make sure that Desmond Ridder believed in him as a coach and that Desmond knew that he had the coaching staff behind him. Arthur Blank was behind him because that's what Arthur is to do. Remember that, everyone. The owner can say what he wants to say, but the owner ultimately has to be supportive of the head coach. He has to back him. Rich McKay, the president, I mentioned earlier about, I always say that he said it never ends well, but Rich is a very smart man, and he's been in there and understand. He's been around this a lot, believe me. He understands. You have to be supportive of your head coach and your general manager. Now you have a situation where they make a decision to move on from Arthur Smith, and Arthur will get a coordinator job soon. No one's worried about that, right? That I say that respectfully. Terry Fontenot is retained, right, as the general manager. He's been here 3 years. And, Terry, as I saw a quote there that Terry's going to have insight into the next general manager.
Yeah, we do have to be careful, though. And somebody did say in the chat that it's interesting to know. B Gamer said that Terry was not. It said that he will have input, but he is not hiring the next coach. So that is an interesting tidbit as a part of this, because that's a nuance to discuss as a part of
and
this.
Let me tell you this. When I came in my first year, in those first 7 years, and we hired Mike Smith, the company and the organization is a lot more comfortable saying, okay, this is ultimately going to be Thomas's pick, even though ultimately it's always the owners. But you have to. I remember Arthur coming up to me. I don't know how many times during that process with Mike Smith. You like him? It's on you. Are you good with him? Et cetera, et cetera. When we got to Dan Quinn, however, we had a bigger group of people in the selection process. He still came up to me and whispered in my ear, "You got to be comfortable with him. Is this the guy? Are you sure this is the guy?" Yes, but they being the organization that makes the firing of the head coach and retains the general manager. You have to think about this, Eric. You have to make sure the fan base is still believing. And the fan base believes that someone is in charge, i.e. like Terry or someone like that they don't believe in, who's going to pick the next head coach. That doesn't necessarily work in their favor. So let's temper it a little bit. Let's make sure that the dudes are doing it, i.e. the owner and the president or CEO, whatever Rich is right now. They're leading the charge, and then that people are thinking Terry's also involved. This is an important nuance that most teams will do when they fire a head coach and retain a general manager.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's really interesting because in some ways Terry has done, he has built a roster, that has some talent. And I think a lot of people look at that roster and say, man, if you could only bring in a quarterback, this thing could actually go places. But this roster last did anything meaningful when it had a quarterback, right? And the first thing that you did when you were the general manager's team, you drafted Matt Ryan 3rd overall, and 8 years later you were in the Super Bowl, and that very year. And we're going to go through all the 3 teams today that let go. Carolina letting go Fitterer, and Washington letting go of Rivera, and they'll probably let go of Mayhew. We're not certain yet, but the common theme with all 3 is they haven't gotten the quarterback right? And so you can talk about how attractive a job is, but not getting the quarterback right is almost entirely the issue in a lot of cases. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here. But to your point, I think Smith has a lot of good elements to him, but maybe to your point, like to your point, a coordinator job maybe the right flavor for him next. And he was very successful at that when he was with Tennessee. To your point, let's move on to the next one, which is Scott Fitterer in Carolina. Fitterer, in 3 seasons, he was hired before the 2021 season. So he was hired after Matt Rule was hired to coach Carolina, and a lot of people believe that that staggeredness was sort of maybe a little bit of an influence there. The Panthers were 14-37 in his 3 seasons as the Carolina GM. He was obviously the GM when they drafted Bryce Young. This past season they were 2-15. Young struggled a little bit there. They had the distinction this past year. The Carolina Panthers were the only team in NFL history to never lead in the fourth quarter. Both of their wins this year were on last-second field goals. They had some successes, of course. I think J.C. Horn's quite a good player. They traded for C.J. Henderson, who I think is has some good elements to him, obviously, but he was available after being the 9th overall pick for a reason. They've made some moves that have been positive, but Carolina is in transition, and I think that there were some people who thought he would stay, so this was surprising to some. But I think anything was possible in Carolina at this point.
So just for perspective, and I've said this before about George Paton at Denver, who no one necessarily knows yet, even though they're reporting that he will be retained, but we'll see how that plays out and where Sean Payton is with that. And Scott Fitterer, my point is both of these men, very good football evaluators, and they're very well liked around the NFL, right? So there's a lot of fan favorites. We don't call them not fan favorites, but a lot of scouting favorites. Both these guys, and let's specifically talk about Scott Fitterer. He's very well liked in the community, in the football community, right? People pull for him. People were hoping that he was going to retain, that maybe he'd have an opportunity to go out there and try to pull in Ben Johnson, right? Maybe that's what he's going to do because we hear that there's a link there. Unfortunately, it didn't work for him. And he has to now, he being David Tepper, has to now look at this and say, okay, I'm starting from ground zero here, trying to figure out who in that world is going to be his right-hand guy. You hear about Mike Ford out there. We know Mike Ford, right? Mm-hmm. Mike Ford is a very talented search person and process guy. Just so everyone knows, Mike Ford has a history of doing coaching searches in Premier Soccer very, very well.
He helped Tepper hire Charlotte FC's manager just recently. And there was the report out that his firm Sportology is helping Carolina hire their current head coach.
Right, and Sportology is known around the league. People, there are people and teams that brought him in. We worked with him really early in Atlanta, way back in a different mode, not to hire coaches, Eric, but to help with the processes. Again, that's a big thing in the NFL when you become head coaches and you come together as a head coach and a GM. It's really important to work with someone like that, I feel. And he is that guy. My point I bring him up is now Mr. Tepper, Mike Ford, and company really have to dig in and see how they're going to navigate through these possibilities. Are they going to bring in an over-the-top football operations president that can be over top maybe a young head coach and a young general manager? This is something that people are watching. Their cap and contract guy, Samir has been in the league for quite a while, mm-hmm. and Samir is still there. And Samir has a really strong ear of the owner. So it's going to be important to see, and we've talked about this, how the search group is put together, right? Is it a wide array within that organization, or is it really narrowed down to David Tepper and 2 or 3 people? It just depends on the organization.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I just think you take a look back at since he's owned the team, right? And it's you have Rivera, and we'll get to Washington in a little bit because Rivera's had the distinction of being there when both Harris and Tepper have owned the team, and so he's had both. But when you change so much, I think the big thing in Carolina, and you're right, Fitterer is really well liked, and I think a lot of people are rooting for him. And I think the Panthers in general are a team that not that many they've never been broiled in scandal. They've never had you were the Falcons general manager for 12 and a half years, and you don't hate the Panthers, right? You hate the Saints, right? Because there's not you're right. It's an interesting thing. No one hates the Panthers. You know what I mean? People want them to have success, and I think the thing about it is I think with Tepper, it's just take a step back, take a deep breath, ask yourself, why do you own the team, right? You and just and tell you have decades of owning this team. You don't have to win the Super Bowl in 2 years, right? And just build the thing. And like everybody, I feel like you're in a rush to win the Super Bowl in 2 years, and that's how you're making decisions. It's like you're gonna be here for a while, right? Start making choices that are going to be long-standing, right? Like if when you buy a football team, your contemporaries are not going to call you, like you're not, if you're a GM, right, and you get hired by this team and you don't make it in 4 years, yeah, you might get fired, right? That's a reality of the situation. If you're a billionaire and you buy a football team and you don't win a Super Bowl in 4 years, well, guess what? You still own the team, right? And so my thing is like, put down a set of values, right? And march forward with those values. And I bet you're like, it's going to start to turn over and you're going to start to see some results. You know what I'm saying? And like, and I think that's kind of how this thing's going to turn around. Right. And I think, and ownership is like the one place where you have that privilege, right? Like where you can start to think long-term, right?
Yeah. Look, that's exactly right. And thinking long-term means really tapping in to, all your resources, for David Tepper to look. Here's what I believe for David. The fact that he has Mike Ford there, the fact that he has the right people around, hopefully bringing to him the right people to consider, and hopefully through the process, they weed through who is best for the organization. You may come to the table with 5 potential GMs and 5 potential head coaches that you like. In the end, it's part of like our job as general managers or former general managers to put the right team together. It's ultimately up to the decision makers to decide who is the best fit for that organization. And as it stands right now, how does that go? There's a lot of talk out there right now that David Tepper is looking to bring in a much more analytically minded person. This is interesting given our business, right? The fact that, and I'll mention his name, the fact that a guy like Brant Tillis is being mentioned at Carolina. He had interviewed before.
Mm-hmm. He finished up there, yes, right? When Fitterer got the job previously. And yeah, he finished up there in 21. Yeah.
And I'll let you expound on that a little bit more. But the reality is this is a guy who has a really, really firm grasp of football and data. And a guy that Mike Ford might be looking at saying to David Tepper, look, this guy's got a well-rounded view of football. He's got, of course, a very fine brain and one that's open, one that will utilize data like Mr. Tepper wants and can position himself and has been around championships. That's a big thing.
So yeah, well, he's been around losers too. Like this is the thing. Like, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but he was on the 2012 Chiefs that went 2-14, right? And that got everybody fired, right? And then he was, built the thing up and won 2 Super Bowls, went to 3. He wrote the Patrick Mahomes contract. That is one of the best contracts that's ever been written from a structural standpoint. He's dealt with, and again, I don't want to speak, but like when people say this, everybody's like, oh, the Hunts are cash poor. I don't mean this, but the Hunts are not a team. The Hunts are not an ownership group that pays 20% over the cap in cash and then spreads it out. The Hunts pay up to the cap and then they don't pay more, right? Yeah. So they have a restrictions that some other teams like Philadelphia and other teams don't have, and he works within that. He scouts players. He doesn't code or anything, but he works with analytics people, in that framework. Yeah, he would be a fantastic GM. And, I don't know that many other people personally, but so I can't opine on how good, Alec Hallaby would be. And he's another one he's the assistant GM for Philly, and Washington has requested to interview him. And I don't know Ian Cunningham for Philly, and that's another one that's been making the rounds, with Las Vegas as well as Washington. But I can speak to Brant, who is brilliant and would make a terrific GM for any of these teams. And I think, yeah, he's somebody who would come in and when you talk about process-oriented people, right, who are willing, and that was also the term, by the way, when you think about, we talked about this on the last podcast, that was also the term that people within the Chiefs building talked about when it was Ryan Poles, where they said he's process oriented, he's detail oriented. And we talked about, what did we say on the last show? When I said, how hard was it when everybody was going to get fired for the Bears, right? When everybody was going to get fired, how hard was it to just stay the course, right? Stay the course. And now everybody's safe, or, at least Poles is safe. There's rumors about Eberflus, but we think that they're safe, right? And how is it to, when things are oscillating, what does it take? It takes detail-oriented, process-oriented people. And that Chiefs organization, that's it. The Borgonzis, the Tillises, the Poleses, the obviously Veach and Reed and all those people, that's what it takes to win championships. And to me, I'm sort of surprised that team that has hosted 5 straight conference championships, won 2 Super Bowls, won 3 AFCs, don't get as many looks as some other franchises. And I'm glad you brought that up, because to me, it should be where some of these franchises look.
Look, I will say, and this is supporting Sumer, of course, and analytics and football and the evolution of what we believe in here. I am like taken aback that more football people don't grasp the idea of taking it and running with it and learning more about it. It's a differentiator, right? If you're a very good football person and you've heard me say it before, the augmentation of your skills with the ability to utilize data and be open, have the right people around you that are going to provide the right data, it just makes you that much better.
Well, it's the other way too, though, because I remember, and it's funny, one of my best friends in the industry, and I won't say who, I got a DM basically, Eric, you're getting soft, when I sort of started to talk to football people more, right? And because, again, like, you build the numbers, you build the models, and you start to come to these conclusions. And there was an article, Nora Princiati, who I know and she, she's awesome. And I was talking, and it was about the running back room and like why you should pay. She was talking about, like, what are the conditions wherein you would pay a running back? And I was like, well, there's probably a condition where the locker room is such that if you don't pay a star running back, they're going to revolt against you and you could lose your job, right? And I'm like, okay, so maybe there's a situation where you price a running back at $9 million and you should pay him $13 million, because otherwise you could lose the locker room. And they're like, wow, Eric, you're getting kind of soft. And I'm like, but like there are these intangible things that you kind of, and I think it cuts both ways, right? People, from your backgrounds need to talk to people like me, but people like me need to talk to people like you, right? And that's how it has to happen. Like, we need to cut both ways in order for this thing to actually work.
You're exactly right. I know we have some more guys to talk about.
Yeah, let's talk lastly about Ron Rivera, because I think that this has to, this really, Rivera kind of, interestingly, right? He went 20, and I know Schefter got this wrong. He went 26-40-1 in 4 seasons in Washington. He never drafted a quarterback in the top end. He inherited Haskins from Jay Gruden, not John Gruden. He dealt with ownership change for the second time in his career as a head coach. He was let go. This year felt like a transition year. He was kind of a good sport, but this year never really got off the ground. He had to deal. He started Sam Howell every single game. He traded both Chase Young and Montez Sweat throughout the season. Martin Mayhew was still there. Who knows how long he'll be there? They did bring Bob Myers from the Golden State Warriors and Rick Spielman, formerly of the Vikings and the Dolphins, to come in and help with their search. What do you think is what's going on with Washington?
So, yeah, I mean, Ron was a Warrior there doing what he needed to do. He's been around the league a long time. There's still people out there saying that he might resurface. He's a strong league person, as you know. And if there's a team out there that can't get, for instance, Bill Belichick, and maybe they're not in the Harbaugh sweepstakes, and they don't want to go for young guy, does he resurface? That's an interesting discussion to have. Now, back to, when you're talking about Bob Myers and you're talking about Rick Spielman, both very reputable general managers and executives in the league. I didn't know about it. I was surprised to see it, only because I wasn't sure what direction, Washington was going to go, who they were going to tap into to help them with the search. As you know, I don't know how much you can talk about it, but the reality is, earlier on there was some research going on out there to see who might be out there in line with the financial guy, like Josh would be the owner there, and we would. Josh Harris, we're asking about like what's the best way to approach this, and I don't know if you're at liberty to talk about it, but there was a gentleman that was involved in trying to go out and try to help him from the basketball world to get to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to piece it together, right? Like, Josh Harris owns the 76ers. Daryl Morey is the I don't know if they call it the general manager, but it's, Daryl Morey runs the 76ers, right? And so you can imagine that, he's kind of using everybody there. And then, of course, Josh Harris hired Eugene Shen, who was, previously of, let me look, the Ravens, Dolphins, Jaguars. So he's like the VP of like strategy there now. So, that's kind of their first foray into hiring kind of the analytics folks. Yeah. So that was their first kind of go around here in the football world. But they kind of, first year, they kind of wanted to keep most things continuous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, now they're at a spot. Watch closely and see what happens, who comes in under that group to, basketball and a football GM coming in to help them with the process. And again, what happens with Martin Mayhew? Martin Mayhew is a second chance general manager. Not many of us have an opportunity to do that. So God bless him that he had an opportunity. Is it short-lived or will it continue? It might continue, right? So it's just going to be interesting to see how Rick Spielman and Bob Myers approach this and what's out there. I have also heard they're looking for a legit football operations president and then maybe do the tiered idea. And I'm a big fan of that. I think it can be very strong.
Yeah, can you expound upon that a little? Because I don't think our listeners are like that. Because most people think, okay, general manager, head coach, and then the assistants, and then that's kind of how things are run. Sometimes the head coach and the GM are kind of parallel. Yeah. Sometimes the GM is the coach's boss, and all that works out. But like, kind of because I don't like when you talk about Rich McKay, for example. I don't think that many people in the audience kind of know like you and Rich McKay's. Because Rich McKay was kind of had your job before and then didn't, and then all this stuff. So like, give the audience like a little bit of a flavor of kind of what you're talking about when you're talking about your sort of like tiered system there.
Yeah, look, traditional hierarchy was, of course, the owner would hire a head coach and the owner would hire a GM, and a lot of times they were side by side, but into the very end when one of them had what we call as 53, final football say, right? It could be the GM, it could be the head coach, depending, and it could switch, right? In time, it could switch. What's happening a lot with some of the younger GMs and the head coaches is they're coming in as neophyte GM and head coach, and they're making a lot of mistakes along the way. And with those mistakes mean their tenure is limited, and before you know it, it's 2 and 3 years in and they're fired. And they don't get a chance to really develop. The thought now from a lot of people in our generation, I'm talking about Rick Spielman, myself, I'm trying to think of, Jerry Reese, even Howie and Eric and a lot of those guys, Eric DeCosta and the people that are there right now in the league, they're all thinking that there is a place for a football operations president. So you would have a football operations president over top of the head coach and the GM, a younger head coach and a GM. If this person, I hate to put just numbers on it, let's just say that person's 50 plus. They have 20 or 30, 25 or 30 years in the league, but they're not respectfully 85 or 75, right? They're still very close to.
They're still able to bike up the hills in Buckhead.
So those guys can be. Here's my feeling about that. And then you have a business operations president on the other side of the building, so it's nice and clean leading up to the owner or the CEO to the owner, the designee. Now, remember, my feeling on this is the key is picking the right football operations head. If you get a guy that's coming in there who, let's just say, is in their mid-50s and they have a lot of experience and they ultimately want to oust that general manager and be the GM, I don't think that's going to work. I know it's not going to work. That president needs to come in my opinion, and they need to tie the contract and his success to the successes of the guys underneath him. That's the way I think it works. Because if you come in and you have a president over top of a GM and a head coach, and they're paranoid every step of the way, and they don't think the guy over top of him is in the best interest of them, then there's going to be all sort of machinations within the relationship, and I think it can fall apart. That's a key. And I would go in to talk to any owner and sell them that idea. You get a really strong person in there that knows he's not coming back to want to be a general manager. He wants to be the president and help that team grow these younger executives and younger head coaches.
Well, I think that the really nice part about that, because one of the, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm wrong all the time, but correct me if I'm wrong, but the worst kept secret in everything is a lot of times the owners have a really big say over the most important personnel decision in all of football, which is the quarterback, sure. Right? And a lot of times the general manager ends up being the fall guy for when that decision doesn't work. And so I think that the more counsel that, because look, you're not going to be able to stop that, right? I don't think, right? You're not going to be able to keep the guy who bought the train set from moving the tools. We know this, right? We know this, that this is not going to change. But I do think the more, I guess, for lack of a better term, protection, or the more insulation that you can have in that decision-making process, or the more, fresh ideas you can have, right? Because that person on that upper tranche is going to have the hard-worn experience of somebody like you who's got, has made that decision before and has maybe signed Matt Ryan to that, that maybe once too many contract, right? Or something like that, right? And you have that younger GM, type person who maybe has some of the newer ideas or something like that that's come from some of the younger research or whatever. That younger head coach who has a new scheme that no one's run before or whatever. I think that triad, for lack of a better term, that maybe is a better insulator than maybe the current, decision-making paradigm in the NFL. And maybe that's going to be more robust to the current the current way that the world works in the NFL.
Well, look, an example for us, if we go back to Atlanta right now, when Arthur Smith came in and Terry Fontenot came in, two first-time general managers and head coaches, the final football say was given to Arthur Smith. So Terry Fontenot becomes what we call in this league GM light. And that's not fair necessarily. I've been GM 53 full control, and I've been GM light, right? I've been both. And it really, if you have the right setup, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you do ultimately what's best. Someone has to have final say of those two. But when there's no check and balance or limited check and balance on that, and you get a younger decision maker, team builder, it doesn't matter if he's really, really smart. It doesn't matter if he's done some really good things at Tennessee with the offensive coordinating and such. Yep. There's a different world when you're coming in to build team offensively and defensively, and making big time decisions and putting your butt on the line for a quarterback. Now, in that situation, it appears that Rich McKay was over top of Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot. He was. Did he have any say in going with Ritter? Or was it, hey, I'm going to give it to the head coach and the GM to make this decision, and ultimately a head coach? I would assume that's how it played out.
Well, and we have so many, but that's all the other part too is Rich won a Super Bowl with Brad Johnson as his quarterback. Yeah. We don't have that many experiences in life, right? We live one life. And so, sure, he has the experience of being with you when you drafted, he knows that you drafted Matt, and Matt was a great quarterback, a Hall of Fame caliber type quarterback. But he also was with Tampa Bay when they won a Super Bowl with just a guy, a Desmond Ritter, and Brad's better than Desmond Ritter, but a good defense team, 1 of 53 kind of quarterback. And so we only live one life, right? And that's another part of where data comes in and where Sumer Sports, right? It can be important where you can come around and say, sure, we know that you won a Super Bowl with Derek Brooks and Warren Sapp and John Lynch and all that kind of stuff, right? But in this NFL, you can't really win that way anymore. You really kind of need to take a bunch of swings at quarterback and, and do it that way, right? And so, and I think that's like, again, where having multiple different decision makers kind of collating and having multiple different abilities and expertise is a really good idea.
Well, I mean, look, just staying on back to the Atlanta vein. Rich, we've said this before. Obviously, he's the head of the competition committee. He's very knowledgeable and understanding of the game and different ideas, right? And Rich knows when to insert and when not to insert. You hope that presidents do and CEOs do, right? Now we're going into a whole different world. If Arthur Blank decides to come in here and go after the big stud coach out there, right? Whoever that may be, how does that play out and how does the organization set up, right? Where Rich McKay, for instance, might, if there's a really power hitter coming in, he, like we all know, would have to pull back a little bit, be the overtop designee to the owner, of course, and let the football people do their thing, right? That's important. And if it's not, how much interaction does Rich McKay, as the CEO of AMBSE, by the way, how much does he have say, or how much will he let some of the other people that are senior level executives in there have say in the football side, right? That's where it just becomes, from organization, everyone needs to know, from organization to organization, there's so many different flavors, right? And it's going to be really
and whether or not that's healthy, right? Like, I think when you get a report that says Washington's interested in Belichick, and like you think about Washington's history, right? 1 year of Vince Lombardi, 1 year of Marty Schottenheimer, it's like, and that's great and that's awesome, but it's like those guys come, and Belichick's the best coach of all time. I'm not saying they shouldn't hire him, but like they come with their group, right? And so, and you better pave. I think about growing up in Minnesota, you better pave the entire street for that person, right? And otherwise, and so, and it's going to take some time, and he's not going to come in right away. I think about Parcells, right? You think about Parcells, who's, again, Parcells is, top N, N small. Parcells came into New England, and it was 1 year they were like 1-11 or something like that, and then they got good. And then he went into the Jets, and like he let Neil O'Donnell start for 1 year. Then he kicked his ass to the curb. Then he went to Dallas, and they were okay. It's when those bigwigs come in, they get shit done, but it takes a little bit of time because it's got to be their thing.
Well, and I've said this time and again, I don't want to repeat it. This is where it is imperative that the owner and his designee, hopefully, or his very close circle, are very, very aware of who's pushing what for what reasons. And I say that respectfully, but it's human nature, right? A president, for instance, of an organization, and Rich is above a president. We don't need to continue to talk about Atlanta. He's the CEO of all of Arthur Blank Entertainment. But organizations that have a president that might be concerned about how things will play out if they bring in a certain coach that's going to be a strong presence. Now that president becomes a sidebar. That's not easy. So I think all along that those owners have to be very aware of what the motives are and who's pushing who, right? Because if Bill Belichick comes in somewhere, believe me, that president that's in that organization, they're over here. They just are. And if they can accept, like, we're ready to take Bill Belichick in for the next 3 or 4 years to win a Super Bowl, and that means my life is going to change as a senior level executive in the organization, they have to, that owner better look at that guy and realize, are you doing this for the team? Because it's very different than bringing in Ben Johnson when you're a president, and Ben Johnson can be taking on mentoring ideas from you. That's a good feeling as a president.
Yeah, exactly. And that's such a good point. Yeah, like this, it's all those things. But the other part, if the reported numbers are true about Ben Johnson, that's another thing, right? Like, so if you throw those big numbers out to try to get him out of Detroit, that's again, it's incredibly complicated. But And that's why, that's why it's hard to win in the NFL, right? Because there's a lot of complications. And that's why, going back to the whole Kansas City thing, maybe that's why they win so much, right? Because those guys are there, they stay there for a while, and that culture is fairly stable, and they know how to run things really well, and there's not a ton of egos in that building.
Can I say, I know we're going to be moving on here, but like, this is a fascinating topic. I've been through it a couple times as far as, the picking of the head coach, right, as a general manager, and coming in as a new general manager, then being a holdover general manager. I speak from a lot of different levels, as well as being a, rank and file guy growing through I've kind of experienced all of that. And I think about it, it is an enervating process, right, Eric? I mean, here's Arthur Blank another 3 years from now doing this again at 82. I mean, that's the last thing he wants to do. He wants to put this team together and help them, which he does. He is amazing at providing an organization with the right resources. But the last thing he really wants to do, I'm sure, is like revisit this. He's not just doing that for the sake of doing it and being a heavy hitter. He's doing what he does best.
Well, and that's also like, that's everywhere, right? When we at Tudor, right, or at Sumer, right, with PTJ, he's like, I want to get the best people in there, and I kind of want to ignore you guys for a while because I want you to figure it out, right? Like, that's exactly how PTJ is. That's exactly how I'm guessing Tepper wants to be. I'm guessing, and I'm guessing that's where a lot of the frustration is, right? I'm guessing that's where, where you look at Carolina and that's where the frustration boils over. It's like, I'm paying a lot of money to the, and where, folks get frustrated. So this has been, Thomas, this has been phenomenal. This will set a record for our most listened to show, I guarantee you. And what's even funnier is I'm going to go through this a little bit because just to make you laugh, there is a running back value discussion going on in the comments as well with some people. So I'm just laughing. I'm laughing along as well because a lot of people are talking about coach hires and GM hires, all this, and then there's a running back value discussion that's happening as well. Before we go, though, I'm going to promote some stuff at Sumer because we got some really cool stuff going as well. We have our playoff preview where you have some quotes and predictions from the guy to my left, Thomas Dimitroff. He's going to pick his Super Bowl pick, his NFC and AFC pick. You also have me, Sean Clement. You also have Tej Seth, Tej Seth and my colleague named Lucy Kent. If you think that the playoff preview looks amazing, Lucy Kent is the one that made it look great. So that's who I'm giving all the accolades to there. But I'm also going to show you guys at sumersports.com. Let me show you guys a little bit of some stuff. Here is the league table. If you want to look at your favorite teams and their chances of winning the Super Bowl this year, just go to that. It is updated through week 18 for all your viewing pleasure. You could also look just at the homepage. The homepage is where you will find the playoff preview tomorrow. You also have on the scroll the probabilities of each team winning each game in the playoffs. So it should be fairly good to go. So this has been a lot of fun, Thomas. Really enjoyed this. We might be back on Wednesday. We are going to transition as we go from the regular season to the off season into the draft and everything. We're still going to have stats and schemes. I might bring on some guests. We're going to transition more into as news comes. We're going to have this podcast just because, we don't really want to force this show. We want it to be like this show where Thomas and I are both engaged. And it's amazing, like today's show was, where the chat is awesome, and we just have a lot to talk about. We're not going to do 25-minute shows. We're not going to talk about games. We're not going to preview games because that's not kind of our cup of tea. We're gonna do this show kind of when we feel like it, frankly, and when there's news to talk about, because I think that's the best content here at Sumer Sports, and hopefully you guys are okay with that. And you were today because this was the most listened to show we've ever had. So for Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show. Thank you all for coming.